National Finishing Trades Institute. I thank everybody for jumping on, and first of all, for taking the e-learning on changing the culture of construction, as well as joining us today here in an abbreviated version of what you might have received if you had took the class in Hanover. So we're trying to do our best during these times to continue to offer some courses that are for our instructors that you can hopefully go back and either introduce them to the e-learning that's available in the learning management system, or do something similar to what we're doing here to get this message, this very important message out to your members. With that, we have a couple of folks as far as the administrative purposes, or those that are hosting the webinar here before we get to our instructors. We have Alice Gwynn and Donna Cruz and Nicole Augustine on as well, who Nicole will be taking attendance, and Alice and Donna will be dealing with the slides as far as moving the slides, as well as there'll be a chat feature as well that Alice will be able to will be taking, and we'll be looking for questions from the instructors, after every couple of slides, or maybe at the end of the presentation. So just briefly, the way I'm just going to give you just a little flow here, and then I'm going to turn it over to either Alice or Donna to just maybe talk about some of the netiquettes, for lack of a better term, from that perspective. So after this introduction, I'm gonna turn it over. Mike Hines is just going to give us who's our industrial liaison, who has been very integral in getting working with the work group here and getting this this curriculum, this training together. So Mike's just going to give us a little how we got here, and he'll also conclude the presentation. We'll then switch it over to Luke for about 30 or 40 minutes or so. Luke is director of addiction services at a local in Hanover, at a treatment facility. Luke has taught this class with Bob once, and he also, if you guys were at FIF, he represented the IFTI on the panel there as well. So he comes with a lot of expertise. Obviously, he's going to talk about maybe kind of like summarize what you saw in that curriculum, but also maybe highlight some of the things that you would have that you might not have got in there that he will bring from his professional experience. We'll then turn it over to Bob Swanson. Most of you guys know Bob Swanson, former trustee, co-chair of the Finishing Trades Institute out of Minnesota. Bob will then take and spend some time discussing suicide prevention, talking about his story and his personal experiences, as well as being a major employer for the International Union as well for many years. And then we'll conclude with Mike. Mike will bring us home here with talking about the resources through Helping Hands, the initiative that the IAPT has been putting forth for its members. So before I turn it over to Mike, I'm going to just, if Alice and Donna have anything that they'd like to add here from a hosting perspective, as far as the chat or as far as the muting, the unmuting, etc., I will hand it over to them briefly.
Okay. Hi, everyone. This is Alice, and you might hear me a couple of times. So we're going to try to use the chat feature on your screen, and there's a little chat box. Mine shows at the bottom of my screen, and it says the word chat under it. And so you can click on that, and it opens up a chat window, and you can either choose to chat with everyone, or if you click it, you can chat directly with me or Donna. But if you have a question, it might be best to just pose it to everyone, and at the end of each of the segments, we'll stop for a couple of minutes and answer questions and allow you to, well, if we need further clarification on your question, we will have you unmute, or we will unmute you. But we're not going to probably unmute everyone at the same time, because it gets a little noisy that way. And then the mute button, if you need to unmute yourself, I see mine at the bottom left corner and it says mute. There's a little telephone that represents it. So for the duration of the meeting, we will have everybody muted, but if we ask you to unmute, you can click there and unmute yourself. Also, for just reminders for anyone who logged in and is on a video of yourself, please be mindful that everyone can see you, and you don't necessarily have to be on video, but if you are, that's fine. Just be mindful of the fact that you are on video. Okay, I will turn it over.
Thanks, Alice.
To Mike. Okay. Okay.
Yep.
Tom.
Yep. Thanks, Alice. Yep. So Mike, just going to give us a quick rundown here, how we got to where we are here, and then again, then we'll move on to Luke. So Mike.
Just for a second.
Hello, can you hear me, first of all?
Yes, Mike, we can.
Great, all right. Hi, everyone, I'm Mike Hines, finishing first LMCI industry liaison. And I too would like to welcome to the first Changing the Culture of Construction online webinar. Ideally, we'd like to be in the classroom on the second floor of the IFTI building in Hanover, but when necessary, we improvise. I've heard Clint Eastwood say that a time or two. I've had the honor to work with the Helping Hand work group and begin the foundational build of the IUPAT Helping Hand initiative. And we've come a long way since late in the year of 2017 in the process of providing substance use disorder, suicide prevention, and mental health support to members and employers. After hearing from Luke and Bob today, we'll talk more, as Tom said, about how we got to where we are today. We all know the physical demands on the construction worker. We've lived it. Mental issues go hand in hand with those physical issues. If your body's not feeling well, chances are your mind is feeling that physical impact. So what do? You've got a job, you've got a family to support, you need to ease the physical and mental pain. You turn to whatever source will accomplish that need so that you can get back to work. The impact and stresses on our employers, co-workers, and families due to the opioid epidemic and suicide is undeniable. Construction workers have been hit hard, and statistically, construction is one of the most affected of all employment industries. The IUPAT recognized that the opioid epidemic and suicide can no longer be ignored. This recognition has evolved and is driving the IUPAT Helping Hand initiative forward. Through the Helping Hand initiative, we are coming alongside our members, employers, and families to provide awareness through training and support. Changing the culture of construction is one of the several components of Helping Hand and is the foundation of Helping Hand. Other components are awareness. As many of you know, we have a webpage, www.iupathelpinghand.com. There are resources on the webpage that can be downloaded, printed, and used for employers and council training and awareness. Also, we're learning more about our EAPs, our employee assistance programs. There's valuable pro bono services that are available through your EAP. Mental health first aid. In November of 2019, 4-hour pilot mental health first aid at work courses were presented in DC3 in Kansas City and DC7 in Milwaukee to their staffs, and that included their office support staff. The presentations were very well received. It was then determined that a labor management program to provide mental health first aid training and support to employers and members in all councils would move forward. This training gives the leaders the tools to support somebody with immediate mental health needs. Then our district council Helping Hand. The goal is that every district council has a local Helping Hand team made up of both labor and management, meeting regularly to chart their course and training, working with their EAP for local support services, and we, the FTI and the LMCI, are here to support that goal as councils build their Helping Hand at the local level. Peer advocacy. This component of Helping Hand advocates for a peer liaison, a brother or sister rank and file member who will be available as a first responder to individuals who are struggling with substance use disorder, thoughts of death by suicide, and other mental health issues. The peer advocate will provide support to help stabilize their peer and assist them in connecting them with help through their employee member assistance program as well as various other support programs. Our hope for you as leaders, trainers, members of the district councils throughout North America is that you would embrace this curriculum presented here today and on the LMS. Use and share the curriculum. This is an opportunity of hope and support for those in the IUPAT family that are desperate for a helping hand. With your support, we can and will remove the stigma of coming forward to receive help and move members to support one another using the IUPAT helping hand and the assistance that is offered. Again, at the end, I'll dive deeper into helping hand, how it all began, and where this valuable IUPAT program will take us into the future in support of positive mental health for the IUPAT and everyone involved. So with that, I want to thank you, and I'll see you at the end. And I'll toss it to you, Luke.
Thanks so much, everyone. I'm Luke DeBoy. I'm Director of Addiction Services. I work at a treatment facility close to the headquarters down in Hanover called Tranquility Woods in Pasadena, Maryland. There I am. I'm the one on that PowerPoint that probably looks like the addict with long hair. I've been Director of Addictions there since pretty much we opened our facility about 5 years ago now, and I've been in the substance abuse professional field for 12 years now. I've worked at both inpatient and outpatient settings, and I've got 14 years of sobriety myself. So yeah, I'm really glad to partake in the IUPAT and was asked to do so, and I really commend the IUPAT really being more proactive than a lot of fields with a lot of times. But we're dealing with a pandemic now. I've been trying to fight an epidemic and pandemic for 12 years now. So addiction and substance use disorder has been not just an epidemic, but worldwide a pandemic for quite some time. It's just becoming more and more obvious. And I think the stigma is not as much as it used to be in some ways, because this disorder, this disease does not discriminate. So thank you guys for partaking in this process. And before I get started, when is my hard stop? What time should I stop? So that way I can be conscious of this. How long do I have?
Luke, if you want to allow 5 or 10 minutes for questions, I would stop about 2:40.
2:40. Great, can do.
2:40 to 2:45. You're scheduled to end at 2:50.
Great. So what I would like you guys to do, I know that you're muted and your camera's off, and that's fine. But what I'll be talking about isn't appropriate for you guys to jump in. So at any point that you want to unmute yourself, and if you got a question or how it relates to you specifically, or who you guys work with, please jump in. I'm not big on just talking nonstop. I like interaction, and hey, we'll see how it goes. So please, at any point, jump in and stop me, and I won't be offended at all. So we'll go to the next slide. So what I'm trying to do and help you guys at, as I'm training the trainers, you guys, helping you to really give you what I know as a professional, but also make it beneficial so that way you can pass this information on. Not only will it bring insight for you, and whether it's your personal lives or professional lives, but really these two things that I'm trying to get across today. How is the brain affected from using drugs? And when someone stops using drugs, how is the brain affected in early and long-term recovery when people stop using? When we're kind of doing this, when I was asked to help, I go, well, gosh, how do I give all this information? So I'm going to do my best to give you guys takeaways, give you guys a lot of insight, awareness, and education, but how it relates to you and what are the important parts for you guys to bring to the people that you work with or who you guys train, because this thing does not discriminate. So those two things, how the brain is affected and what does it look like when people are in recovery when they're no longer using. All right, next slide. So we have heard this thing, it can be controversial that, you know, addiction is a disease, specifically a brain disease. And one way we can look at that saying disease, if you break it down, it's simple, a dis-ease. If we have dis-ease, then we're physically and behaviorally affected when we're not at ease. But it's not just that the brain is significantly affected. One of the definitions of disease is when the brain responds to stimulations or situations involving reward, stress, and lack of control in an unhealthy way. Well, that certainly happens with addiction. What you see on this slide is a picture of a brain. If it's cut right in the middle, right down your nose, this is what the brain looks like. When people use X amount of drugs for an X amount of time, one of the reasons, I'll give you an example, one of the reasons why binge drinking is considered 5 or 6 drinks is not because that seems like a good number and your BAL might be too high and you shouldn't drive, but we've got this organ to the left side of our body called a liver. And the liver has 300 to 400 functions. And when you consume X amount of drinks, 4 or 5 drinks in X amount of time, and that liver cannot do what it's designed to do. It's designed to do a couple hundred things. But when it can no longer break down the alcohol and get rid of it, it stops every other function that it is supposed to do, and it does one function to get rid of the toxin, the alcohol. When it can't get rid of it quick enough, well, it's got to go somewhere. So it surpasses the liver, it goes through the bloodstream, which is one reason why they call it a blood alcohol level. It's in your blood. And then it goes straight to the brain. And when we consume X amount of drinks for X amount of time, and the liver can't get rid of the toxins and the poison, it goes to the brain, it starts damaging the brain. Now, all drugs do this in different forms. Whether you smoke a drug, snort a drug, inject a drug, it will go through, whether it's your bloodstream, your lungs, and it'll eventually, if you smoke it, if you snort it, it eventually goes to the brain and starts damaging the brain. I'm guessing you guys, whether it's, you know, there's a statistic that says 1 out of 4 of Americans will have a drug disorder in their lifetime, and everybody will be affected by drugs personally. And it's probably true. If you don't know someone close, you know someone that is affected by this drug abuse and drug addiction. So when it physically, excuse me, when it physically enters the brain and starts damaging the brain, that's when you start to think of the word detox. So here's one of the takeaways that I want you guys to get across, that if you look at the word detox, the DE means remove, and the tox means toxins, poisons. So when people are in detox, where they're at a medical facility or they're giving medications to taper off the abuse of drugs, it's because they physically have changed their body and their brain at a toxic level. And when we do that, we damage our brain from top to bottom. So what I'm going to do is, one of the things that I want to get across is, whether it's a loved one or a coworker or an employee that is using drugs and alcohol, their brain is damaged, which is why this is a brain disease. The first thing that is damaged from top to bottom, I don't know if you can see it, but it's called the cerebral cortex. And when I go like this, I don't know if you can see me on the camera, this is the part of the brain that is the frontal lobe, think of your forehead, and that's called the cerebral cortex. What that is responsible for is a couple things that are really important. One of the things that we are as human beings is we are forward thinkers. So over centuries and generations and development, if let's say that I'm a caveman and my caveman wife or my kids are playing and I've got a fire going, and if I've got a lion or a saber tooth, and all of a sudden I got to take that information with the front of my brain, and I need to make sense of it. I need to process it. I need to know logic and reasoning what to do with that. So I need to know if I need to fight or flight. And as we develop and evolved, we damaged this part of the brain that's responsible for rational logic, reasoning, and processing information. So if I damage that part of my brain, and I'm using drugs and alcohol, and I'm coming up or coming down, or I've got it in my blood, even though I'm not high and I'm at work, all of a sudden my work can certainly be affected negatively when I have a trouble processing information. Problem number one. So when this happens, logic can go out the door. And you as a boss or you as a loved one can see someone who is having negative consequences from their drug use or their drinking use. Now, when negative things start to happen, if the part of my brain that is damaged that, once again, is responsible for processing this, I start to bullshit myself. I start to be in denial. I start to minimize the seriousness, and other people see it. The negative things happen to me, but that part of my brain is damaged. So I always compare the medical model, which we're looking at, to a 12-step model. And a lot of people think that they really don't jive together, but they do. So the medical model says that my ability to have planning and reasoning is damaged. If you look at Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous and the 12 steps, step one in the 12 steps says we admitted we were powerless over drugs and alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable. Well, why are people powerless over drugs and alcohol, and why have their lives become unmanageable? Because their part of the brain has been damaged. For them to make sense and logic and reason has been damaged. So that's the first thing to be damaged, is our processing brain. Now we continue to use, and then the mid part of our brain starts to get damaged, which is called the hippocampus. So that's kind of right in the middle. Excuse me. I don't know, it's pretty small in here, but it's at the bottom or in the middle of that cut, and it's called the hippocampus. And it's a really weird word. It's Greek for horse, hippo, and campus, which means sea monster. So I think that's pretty ironic that it's named after a horse sea monster. That's Latin and Greek for you. But what this part of the brain is the midbrain. And this part of the brain is responsible for things like memory and emotion. This is a part of the brain that regulates your memory and regulates your emotion. So let's look at the progression of substance use. Why does anyone use drugs and alcohol? Because it feels good. I always say we're missing sports, but the example that I always give is I'm close to Baltimore, Maryland, and I'm a Ravens fan, and if the Ravens win, hey, let's go have a celebration, let's go drink, or let's go get messed up. The Ravens lost. Well, let's go drink, let's go get messed up. It becomes the go-to to cope. It becomes the go-to to regulate my emotions. Well, if it makes things feel good, it can make things feel better. Well, if I'm having a bad, stressful day and my processing logical brain is messed up and my behaviors are messed up and my boss is yelling at me and my work is struggling and my motivation is off because I'm damaging the hippocampus, which regulates emotion and learning and motivation, then all of a sudden it's reassuring why I should be drinking and drugging. I don't like the way I feel, so let me cope with drugs and alcohol. So I hope you guys are beginning to see how the brain is affected and why the progression of drugs and alcohol continue to happen. Stress is getting worse. You're not doing as well in your job. The boss is seeing it. Your motivation, your work ethic isn't as good. Your perspective and your way to process and make logic and reasoning of your motivation isn't there. So all of a sudden people become more dependent and reliant on drugs and alcohol. So far, so good. Is everyone with me? Give me a yes. Click your unmute button, someone.
Yes.
All right, cool. Thank you.
Yep, we got you.
Good to go. Yeah.
Yay.
We're here.
All right, so now we've damaged the logical part of our brain. We've damaged the part of the brain that regulates emotions and memory and how we remember these things. So the things that we did in our past and our behaviors, the boss is seeing the behaviors as bad. The family members, the loved ones, the wife, the husband, the children are seeing these things. But that part of my brain that has these, how I remember these things begins to change. So one thing you'll hear in the treatment world is that we're master manipulators as addicts and alcoholics. So we start to rationalize our behaviors. We start to manipulate other people so that way we can kind of keep this way of coping and surviving with drugs and alcohol going. So you'll hear people say one part of the brain sells bullshit, the other part of the brain buys bullshit. The medical model shows us why it's happening. So continue with the progression of drugs and alcohol, then we start damaging the lower part of the brain, or we call it the primitive brain. So this is the part of the brain which is responsible for survival. This is where people go, I can't be an addict or an alcoholic because I haven't lost my job yet. I can't be an addict or alcoholic because I'm not the Skid Row bum with a brown bag living underneath a bridge. I can't be an alcoholic because I haven't got it in DUI yet. I can't be an addict because I'm not using a needle. So then we think, because not all of my life is unmanageable, that I can't be that bad. But often people realize after they go to a place like Tranquility Woods or an inpatient or an outpatient and kind of allow themselves to see other people's perspective, that I have put myself at risk. I have been in an altered state at work using heavy machinery. I have manipulated myself and drove in an altered state, that I had my kids in the back of my seat when I was driving, and I know I shouldn't have, but I still did it anyway. That just because you haven't lost everything doesn't mean that you aren't starting to damage this part of the brain. So the brain is damaged from top to bottom. Well, guess what? How it heals? It heals bottom up. So let's go to the next slide. So when I'm with the clients in my residential facility, ideally, I could have them for 3 to 6 months. Insurances won't allow me to have that. One of the reasons why I would like people for 6 to 24, or for at least 3 to 6 months, is because how bad the brain is damaged. Now, mind you, people can still function in an altered state. I got used to, at 20 years old, going to school, going to work, high, intoxicated, inebriated, coming up, coming down. I trained my brain and body to function in my altered state. That was my new normal. Was I as effective when I wasn't? Well, I thought I was. That was my logical part of my brain. But our brain begins to rewire to think, okay, how can I function the best way I can and still manage to cope with drugs and alcohol? Because it's not about wanting it. Eventually becomes a dependence and a physical need, while we damage the brain at the same time. So as you see here, there's a fancy word called PAWS, post-acute withdrawal syndrome. To break it down, acute withdrawal is detox. So acute withdrawal is those 7 to 14 days after you stop using. Okay, that's just a fact. That's just, you don't really need to know the depths of that. But what we're talking about now, that these are all the syndrome means a group of symptoms. So these are all the things that happen after you stop using. You no longer have drugs and alcohol in your system. Whether you go to detox, you go to outpatient, you go cold turkey, you stop using, your brain begins to go, what is my normal steady state? You're no longer introducing these chemicals that are rushing to my brain and beginning to smother and damage my brain. So what is my normal? So when we stop using drugs and alcohol, usually after that 7 to 14 days, your brain begins to go, okay, what's my normal? What is my normal amount of serotonin and dopamine, my feel-good chemicals, the things that prevent me from being depression, the things that are released when I have sex, that I don't have to feel high from me using a supplement that makes me drunk or high, right? So because we do damage to our brain, I don't know if you guys see that statistic, 75 to 95% of all addicts have some kind of brain dysfunction. We just explained why. Because of that brain dysfunction, it can take up to 6 to 24 months for your brain to get back to what it should be. Well, what causes that? The amount of damage that we do to our brain, the amount of stress that we have. So it takes time for our brain to get damaged. It's going to take time for our brain to heal. So how does our brain heal? It heals from bottom up. So 3 things to mark down, right? The takeaway is our brain is damaged top to bottom. Our brain is healed bottom up. So the bottom part of the brain is a survival brain, which is things that we don't have to think about. Survival in the sense that it's my heart rate, it's my breathing, it's my survival. Well, let's look at all these heroin addicts and fentanyl that's going on. People know that their system could shut down and they stop breathing, but people are still taking it. Why? Because it can get them high and get them real high, even with the dependence. So people risk their life to do that. People risk their job because of the physical dependence. If it was just a choice, this thing wouldn't be an epidemic or pandemic. If it was just a choice, I could go pros, cons, too many negatives. I'm not going to put my life at risk and my family's life at risk. If it was just that kind of logic and reasoning, well, we damaged that part of the brain. So all of a sudden, people come to my facility and they realize, okay, I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose my house. I'm going to lose my wife and kids. I'm going to lose all these things. I need to stop. They come to treatment. All of a sudden, they want a roof over their heads. They want to eat 3 square meals a day and not just a liquid diet. So that survival part of the brain comes back. Then the midbrain, hippocampus. What is that responsible for? Emotions and memory. So what really begins to happen in the healing process 3, 6, 12 months after using? The emotions. So a lot of times I say there's part of recovery is a physical recovery. It's a mental and emotional recovery. So someone that all of a sudden, whether it's part of the FTI, the IUPAT, the finishing trades, that they go away to treatment, whether it's for an outpatient or an inpatient, they're gone for a month, they come back. Now, don't you think that's going to be stressful? I was used to using with a bunch of guys that might use too. I'm used to using guys at home, and all of a sudden I've been gone for a month. I come back and I no longer can use. That's one stressor. I come back and now I'm expected to be right where I was. But remember, we've designed our brain to function in an altered state. Let's go to the next slide. So here are some of the symptoms of post-acute withdrawal. I gotta hurry up. We're talking how the brain's affected. These are some of the symptoms. Inability to think clearly. So it's not necessarily intelligence, it's the ability to use logic and reasoning. When I'm stressed, my ability to think clearly is damaged. Memory problems. When I went to treatment at 20 years old and they told me to take a semester off of school, I wasn't in this field. I was doing athletic training, the guys that run out in the fields. And I was told to go in and after a semester I went back, I was told to read. So I got a paper due the next day. I opened my book, I read it, I couldn't absorb it. So I opened my book and I read that word out, that paragraph out loud. I could not absorb the words that I was reading. My brain could not process that information. My thought was, well, I could just take an Adderall. I'd pay $5. I won't snort it. I won't smoke it, but I need to focus, so I better take this Adderall. That was my logical thinking. Luckily, I didn't. I talked to my sponsor, my support network, and I went away to a meeting across the street. An hour and a half later, I came back and I could function. There's people that work on cars or work on mechanics, things that they didn't have to think about for decades. They go back, 30 days later, 2 weeks later, and things that were second nature, even when they were high or altered or withdrawing or hungover, all of a sudden now in early recovery, things didn't work so quickly because the brain is trying to heal itself. So that brings a lot of stress to a lot of people. That emotional overreaction, I say people are on that emotional roller coaster. There's a reason why that's happening. The go-to coping mechanism is not there. We're having these stresses that we haven't dealt with in a long time, and we're trying to make sense out of them. Sleep disturbance is a big one, physical coordination problems, and the big one, stress and anxiety. So these are some of the things that happen and make this thing even more epidemic and pandemic. Throw in the culture of a lot of, whether you're, I've got, one second, I'm coughing like crazy. I don't have the corona, I promise. Right now I've got an ER doctor here that is an addict and an alcoholic, and she feels the stigma is, if you go back to work and you're an ER doctor and they know that I was drinking, they wouldn't let me work there. You've got trades where this kind of got the bravado of, are you weak? Can you control your drinking or drugging? You should be okay. And all of a sudden, we're teaching them in treatment that you do need support. You do need time for your brain to heal. You can function. You just might need to allow yourself to be where you're at and not overwhelm yourself. Then all of a sudden, what's this culture? Is it supporting healing and recovery and support, or is it creating these stigmas? So whether it's blue collar, white collar, and everything in between, it can be tough. I give you my experience with going back to school and trying to read and write a paper. My brain was struggling. So these post-acute withdrawal symptoms, or these 6 to 24 months after, it's challenging. It's really challenging. Talk to me. Thoughts, questions, takeaways. What'd you learn? What are you going to teach from this? I threw 2 or 3 groups at you and I combined them into one.
It takes a while for the brain to get damaged, so it'll take a while for it to repair itself.
Mm-hmm. Good. And you see how and why, right? It doesn't get this way overnight. It doesn't get better overnight. Good. What else?
Well, you have to be strong enough to ask for help.
Sure. Go to the next slide. So, and you guys they're hitting upon it. If this thing is not you stop using and then everything's okay, whether it's PAWS or is it recovery in general, that to those 2 or 3 points that you guys made, that they need support through this thing. So there's different kinds of support. There's continuing treatment, whether it's outpatient programs, whether it's addiction counselors, whether it's 12-step programs, smart recovery, faith-based, celebrate recovery. There's a lot of support systems. People need to know in early recovery they're not alone, and they're not the only one going back to work where they're not where they want to be or feel that they should be. A big thing is identifying emotion states that could trigger that. Well, anything could lead to a stressor, right? And you can use that as an excuse, or you can use that to go, okay, I have to have emotional sobriety. Part of the brain that comes back last is the cerebral cortex. So we're trying to make sense out of emotions when we don't necessarily have the ability to really make logic or reason out of some of these feelings that we've been numbing out with drugs and alcohol. So we need that help and go, okay, how do I really deal with anger, whether it's with a significant other, with my asshole boss? How do I deal with boredom? I always got to drink or drug, and now all of a sudden I don't have that, and now I'm bored, which leads to stress. The emotions of depression or sadness, this is, I give this an example, and this can really, for a lot of people, I've had guys who do 7 tours, and then all of a sudden they're saying that this thing is taking them down, this liquid, this powder, this smoke is taking them down. And I'll give you guys this analogy that we could go to that CVS down the street and you take that pill of X-Lax pills, right? And those X-Lax gives you diarrhea, right? So if someone says, I have the desire not to crap my pants if I take these X-Lax. Well, if you take those X-Lax pills, you take them all, you're going to crap your pants. So it's not just about a desire to no longer drink or drug anymore, right? People have the desire all the time to never pick up again, but because of the emotional regulation and the ability to process these things when they happen, it's not just about willpower. If it was, it wouldn't be an epidemic. It wouldn't be a pandemic. So it takes time to go through the emotions, to make sense of these things and find a healthier routine that's not riddled with the need to drink or drug. Exercise. What does exercise do? It releases endorphins and dopamine, a lot of the same feel good that drugs do. So it gives us a natural energy that we have to really be patient and understanding. And that means as the IUPAT, as the bosses, as the family members, that sometimes they may be acting a little bit more off in early recovery than when they were using, because they don't have those coping skills as they did before. Treat yourself with patience and understanding. This can be really hard for a lot of people because we are seeing these as observers as some of their behaviors, and it's not lining up with healthiness. No one does recovery perfect. Hopefully people just don't use and learn how to change their behaviors with treatment and support. Allow time for care for spiritual self and do things, bring healthier comfort. There's this big spiritual component for a lot of recovery, because if they're saying there's a part that is unmanageable, well, how do I manage? And spirituality is a big comforting support for a lot of people, especially in 12-step recovery or faith-based. Give yourself time to heal your brain disease. It takes time. I'm a big advocate for treatment. This thing doesn't stop. If you look at other chronic diseases, and this is a chronic disease, there's COPD, there's congestive heart failure, there's diabetes, there's HIV. All these other chronic diseases still need treatment. So we have to treat this one even though we stopped using drugs and alcohol. So hopefully that was beneficial. Please shoot away any questions, thoughts.
I think it's certainly important to stay in touch with your support, whether that's through a 12-step program and the fellowship. And speaking from experience, I value that fellowship probably even more than the program itself. And I think if the program is going to be someone's support, I think we all have to realize that speaking for myself, I didn't drink from a brown paper bag. I didn't drink every day, but that stuff sure complicated my daily problems, I guess you'd say. Complicated them. But, staying in touch and learning to hear and realize what pertains to you and what doesn't. Because when I'm in those groups, I have learned over the years to pick out, to understand what does pertain to me and what doesn't. That faith base that you spoke about, it's amazing people that can scare off. And that's where I think that support and that fellowship is even more important, and that ability to decide for yourself what truly pertains. Because when I listen to people talking there, most everybody in there, there's one little piece of something they say that does apply to me, then and now. So I think it's important, because when people seek help through these programs, whether they're forced to be there or made a decision, we come in scared, we come in embarrassed. We have that shame. I think we all have that, and that was a very high hurdle for me to get over. So, and that's all I've got.
Thank you.
So Luke, the question was posed to the group. If anybody in their district council or local union have any processes in place, steps, actions implemented to deal with substance abuse issues on the job at your training centers. So a couple of people have responded that they have programs that the members can go to for any kind of support, an employee assistance program. Other people have gone to some meetings with a member to support them. And another district council says that they also have a employee assistance program that every member has access to utilize all of the benefits that they offer. So it sounds like it's not just for substance abuse.
Good.
And same with a couple of other district councils are saying the same thing. They have a program in place.
Good.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Hi, this is Chris calling from DC 35 in Boston. We're doing up here is we've started taking this curriculum, myself and two other gentlemen who I believe are both on this, Mike and Jim, have started to teach it to our apprentices. Every apprentice has to take a 2-leg course. One first based on substance use, and then the second we do a mental health presentation. A lot of that curriculum we've learned from here, from Helping Hand, and also from the Allied Trades Assistance Program out of Philadelphia, our partner down there. What we're also doing is we have a very involved recovery group on Wednesday nights. Tonight we'll be doing, we started doing Zoom meetings, but we normally meet every Wednesday night as a group. It fluctuates in size, but we've probably had over 100 people come through the door at one time or another. You know, we're continuously trying to make things better as far as stuff on the job. We got a little, we've sent 6 or 7 members through an organization called Labor Assistance Professionals. It's kind of a shotgun course, if you will, but it does come with a national certification. And we've got 6 or 7 members, including 2 guys that I mentioned earlier who have that certification. You know, certification's important in this field when we're trying to get into it. You don't have to get a doctorate, but you certainly want to know what you're talking about. And when you gauge a member's problem, you know, where you're going to recommend that member to go, you know, it's very important. So, you know, we're doing a lot of different things, and I commend, you know, the International for what they're doing, and we want to stay involved with this and keep doing what we're going to do. We have a very intimate relationship with our EAP. When I say we, you'll hear me say we, it's really me, Mike, and Jim, who work hand in hand together. We all have different, there's a retired member who's enjoying life and doing this for himself. Mike is a full-time teacher with us, and I'm a business agent here. So, you know, we do draw, obviously me and Mike draw our checks from the members, so it's important to us. But, you know, when a member calls, we get together and you know, if it's a mental health issue, the 3 of us are in recovery. And if it's a mental health issue, we have, as I said, we have a great relationship with our EAP, our outsourced EAP, and we shoot it right over to them, and you know, we follow up with them. You know, that's important. When you start to do this, it's important to a members, and I think the gentleman Luke would agree. It's important to show after the fact that, you know, the counsel's here for you. You know, it's easy to stay sober when you're in a program. You know, everybody's sober, there's strict rules, but it's when you get home is when the real recovery counts. And all the work we've done here would be for naught if we weren't following up with the members, making sure they're getting what they need from us to the extent that we can do it. We're not going to keep anyone sober. We're not going to keep anyone healthy, but we can always make a phone call and follow in. And it's important. And as I've said a million times, Mike and Dr. Tim have heard me say it a million times. They're out there. The members that want to help are out there in droves, who have a story like mine, or the gentleman Luke, or Mike, or some other people that I know that are on this class here. And they want to help. They just don't know where. And so it's important that you reach out to them or designate someone to reach out to them and say, hey, what do you think about helping? The more, the merrier. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. This is Tom Funstein. And just another thanks to those people who have shared some of the things that they're doing at their council, at the council level. That's great. And I'm just going to throw a question out here, and probably I'll ask you maybe even one more time, or just for you to start thinking about. But if you could share some responses, that would be great as well. But the name of the course here is changing the culture of construction, with the emphasis on, Luke mentioned the stigma. Obviously, there's a stigma in society. He mentioned he had an ER doctor that's in his treatment facility right now. This is probably more open-ended, but what are some steps? Obviously education here, but in order to maybe possibly change that culture of construction, where someone is willing to reach out to somebody, as Chris mentioned, that's out there that's willing to assist. Anybody have any thoughts on that, or like to share on that?
will, if you don't mind.
Or Luke could as well.
Go for it.
Well, I was going to say, one of the things about what's happening right now, I had a doctor's appointment the other day, and I had to do it online through a video chat thing, which is really convenient, especially with people who have trouble getting out to doctor's appointments, who can't take the time off of work to go to a doctor's appointment, stuff like that. And then also just the stigma of having to go to the doctor. The age of the things we're dealing with right now, with the whole needing to do video chats and doing things to the internet, there's a lot of counseling services that also offer those same services. And perhaps connecting with some of those services and building relationships, so that when someone comes to you, you can offer this as a service, as opposed to having to go to a doctor. And just going online and having a counseling service could be really helpful. And it's something that, the necessity of the times we're in right now is sort of brought to light, and could be used at any point, though.
Yeah, as one of the things that make our facility most successful is what they do outside of our facility, because I think I explained why it's necessary. And with everything that's going on right now, majority of outpatient programs are telehealth right now. So you can get treatment in your own house. A lot of therapists, majority of therapists are doing telehealth, and insurances, not every insurance would allow you to do therapy online, but now with everything going on, I think 95% of the insurances are allowing telehealth. So it's been more, in some ways, it's been more accessible more than ever because of this, when it comes to treatment and services. So
yeah, and I can see that being a huge benefit with the kind of culture we're in.
Absolutely. The one thing that I do want to say about stigma in general, and I think where we're at now with addiction and mental health has come quite a long way from really just 10 years ago. There's still a long way to go. And two things where I think still has a lot of stigma is substance use disorder and mental health. I think I may even said this to Bob at some point, but any other chemical imbalance, there's not a stigma. If someone has high blood pressure, very rarely do you see someone get made fun of because maybe they're not exercising and the nutrition's off, but a high blood pressure medication, people don't think twice about it. But if someone has a legitimate chemical imbalance with depression or anxiety or schizophrenia, often our society doesn't see that as normal or healthy or part of what our brain chemistry does. And we can't, I believe we can't just rely on medications. There's got to be an action for every treatment. But I think with mental health, whether it's depression or anxiety or bipolar, that medications do play a role if they do the other forms of treatment to take care of themselves. That there may be some medications that could be beneficial. I certainly won't say all are beneficial in the substance use world, but there may be a place for that if you do the other forms of treatment. So I think we're getting there. It unfortunately helps that this substance use and mental health doesn't discriminate. So there's all walks of life that have these dysfunctions. So hopefully that's slowly helping. And what I'm just heard everyone say so far, hey, there's a lot of people that have this. They'll share their experiences. They'll share their recovery, and it doesn't have to be a stigma. So it's changing the culture.
Okay, and so before we wrap this section up, I think Justin would like to say something. So Justin Oshel, if you would like to unmute yourself, you can speak.
Yeah, hi everyone. I just wanted to, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to say I think it kind of has to start on the job sites. I know, and probably a lot of people on this have experienced overdoses in their local or suicides. And in every situation that I've experienced in my career, I always feel like I wish I could have seen something or noticed something or said something. So I always try to tell the apprentices, don't feel bad about asking someone if they're okay. Because you work with these guys every day on the job site, when there's something a little off. So just trying to tell them not to be afraid to say, hey, you okay? Because sometimes that might be all that it takes.
Well said.
Thanks everybody for the questions, and you can continue to use the chat feature because this is being recorded, and if there's something that you wanted to ask there, you can, or you can, if you want, you can send a direct email to me or Alice or somebody to the FTI International. We can get that answer from Luke, but we appreciate Luke joining us and being a partner with us in this, in changing the culture, and his expertise, and not just from his own experience, but also running a facility and what he sees on the day-to-day. So it's a great, it's been a great addition to the program here. So thanks, Luke. And as we transition to the second part of the class would be on suicide prevention. As Donna's queuing up the slides, I'm going to introduce Bob Swanson just again. Bob, again, he was co-chair. He's an employer from a painting contractor of Minnesota. Bob does a lot of stuff for us in addition to the substance abuse. You might have seen him teach STP. I think he has also taught the contractor course. So if you want, starting a business course that the GST's office has. He's a real asset to us, and in addition to Bob's, experience from the employer side and working with the IUPAT, Bob also has a very powerful personal story that I'm sure will come out in his presentation here. So with that, I'd like to introduce Bob Swanson, and same concept here. If you have a question, you can chat it. Alice will read it out, and we'll have some time as well at the end for some general questions for Bob. Bob?
Hey, Bob, unmute yourself. Bottom left corner.
Got
There
it.
you go.
Okay, sorry. Thank you for letting me be part of this today. As Luke was pressed for time, I will be also, but I'm going to hit some highlights. And this is what we cover in the 2-day program. Luke has the first day and Mike and I have the second day. But I was involved in the painting industry for 45 years. I've been retired now almost 5 years. And I have had no training in mental health, but my training is through the son that I lost. I am a suicide loss survivor. Our oldest son, Michael, who was our second child, died at age 33 on March 13th, 2009, and he died by suicide. Part of what I want to tell you today, I'm not going to have time to go into his story, but I want to talk about a little bit about mental health real briefly. I want to talk about some statistics about suicide and its impact. More importantly, I want to talk about our industry. I want to talk about new terminology so we can look at this issue differently. And then most importantly, what can you do about it? Justin brought up a great point, and I was at that point early in my career. I can reflect on an employee, a young apprentice that died by suicide in our company. I had no clue what to do about it, but hopefully this is what we're going to give you some tools. So next slide. So all we're talking about is an illness. It's a condition of being unhealthy in your body or mind, and Luke kind of teed that up. A specific condition that prevents your body or mind from working normally. And it just so happens all mental illnesses are illnesses of the brain. Nobody wants the illness. It's nobody's fault. And the key is they're all treatable. So I can't emphasize that enough. But because of the stigma, many times people don't get the treatment they really deserve. Next slide. So two of the most common mental illnesses are anxiety disorder and depression. They're both treatable. Many people live quite well when they get the proper treatment. So I want to say there's a lot of similarities between physical and mental illnesses. We just don't see what's going on in a person's brain. But both illnesses are difficult many times to diagnose. My son was misdiagnosed in high school. We now know that's pretty common because our brains don't fully develop until mid to late 20s. And it wasn't until his late 20s he was properly diagnosed. Many times they're co-occurring illnesses. Many people that are receiving treatment for substance use are also living with depression, anxiety disorder, other mental illnesses. My son lived with 4 mental illnesses, and we didn't really know until later in life that he was living with all those illnesses. He lived with bipolar disorder. He lived with seasonal affective disorder. He lived with anxiety disorder, and he lived with substance use disorder of alcohol. There's a range of severity. You can have anxiety disorder, and through just mental self-talk, you can function very well. Or it can be extreme where you can't even leave the home, leave your residence. All illnesses have a continuum of severity. They also oftentimes, you can relapse. As Luke indicated, it's also true with any illness. My deceased brother had many illnesses, but one affected his breathing. And he could be doing fine, and all of a sudden we have to take him to the hospital because his oxygen levels were horrible. All illnesses have that potential. Many side effects from medication. That's true with, again, all use of medications. We all probably, I know myself, I take some medications. And before you start a prescription, it's always that, holy cow, why am I even taking this? Because of all the side effects. But hopefully the benefits are overwhelm the risks. So next slide. So question is, why do we react differently to someone who has a physical illness versus a mental illness? I would submit the main one, we can't see what's going on in somebody's brain. We don't have good markers. Even the medical profession does not have good markers as to, I'll take my son, was really going on in his brain? Did he really, was he really living with bipolar disorder, or was it something else? With all physical illnesses, we can take your blood pressure. We've got all sorts of things we can do to monitor what's the level of severity. And then why the stigma? I would submit the stigma is partly out of fear. Things we don't understand as human beings, we tend to then fear them. I would submit what we're going through today. If we understood COVID-19, we wouldn't be as fearful. It's the lack of knowledge, lack of what is all this going to end up being. If we knew that it would end next Friday, our fear level would go down. Well, mental illnesses are the same. We just don't know what's going on with that person. And then lastly, I would throw out terminology. With mental illnesses, we say he's bipolar, he's schizophrenic. We don't say he's cancer. So I would submit, in my opinion, when we say he's bipolar, we're labeling the person with the disease. We're reaffirming the stigma, reaffirming the shame, reaffirming it's their fault. I would choose to say my son lived with bipolar disorder, that I can then be angry at the disease and compassionate towards him. So I would ask you to think of that change in terminology. People live with these illnesses, don't label them with the illness. Next slide. So what are some common traits of mental illness? Usually more than one illness. As I stated, my son lived with 4. Usually regular use of alcohol or drugs. We'll get into later, that can be partly the self-medication. Lots of unexplained anger. I have a lot of regrets, and one is I didn't understand my son's anger. He was not angry at me. I took it personally. He was angry at his illness. Why can't I get better? I'm doing all the things I'm supposed to, and I can't get better. So there's a lot of anger, a lot of shame. Can you believe my son was ashamed of his illness? We were ashamed of his illness. What illness do you know of you're ashamed of? Nobody's ashamed of today having COVID-19. Nobody's ashamed of having cancer. But people living with mental illnesses, there's lots of shame. Questionable decision-making. We all have decision lapses, but I use the term dirty windshield. So I look at my son and I look at, he made a lot of bad decisions, but his brain wasn't working properly. So when his brain wasn't working properly, his windshield, what he saw, was distorted. So if those of you in the northern climates in the winter, we put salt on the roads and your windshield gets all smeared up when you hit the windshield wipers. And if you don't have windshield washer fluid, you can't see clearly. But once you put the fluid out, now you can see clearly. So his vision, his perception was totally different than what I was seeing. So many times, I just couldn't understand why he made the decisions he did. And then use of prescriptions. Again, I'm going to compare this to all drugs. So if we go to the doctor and have an ailment, the doctor prescribes something, and it makes us, after a couple days, feel worse. What's the common thing we do? We quit taking it, and we might substitute something else to feel better. My son was no different. He had lots of side effects to these drugs. The flip side, I had last winter, I had a infection in my feet. And the doctor prescribed an antibiotic that I was to take for 14 days, twice a day, religiously. After about 3 or 4 days, the swelling was down, the pain was down. It was really easy to think about, you know, I don't know if I need this anymore. I'm going to quit taking it. My son did the same thing. One of his prescriptions later in his life was for his anxiety disorder. After a while, he'd feel good, and it was a huge temptation to quit taking it. So I want to just say the use of prescriptions, sometimes people have said after my son's death, well, it's too bad he quit taking some of his meds. That had nothing to do with his death. So I just want to get that out there. Next slide. So the good news is, with proper care, people can live with these illnesses. The sad thing is because of shame and stigma, only about 60% of the people that live with a mental illness get the proper treatment. Now, besides that, there's other reasons. We have a real lack of mental health facilities in our country. We have a lack of psychiatrists. We have a lack of psychologists. So let me give you an example. Today, if somebody wanted to have a new psychiatrist, they had never seen a psychiatrist before. It's very common to have to wait at least 12 weeks for an appointment. Now, if you're having real health issues with your brain, why would we want a person to wait 12 weeks for an appointment? If I called my health line right now and said, I'm having heart palpitations and I don't know if I'm having a heart attack, I think I'd have an ambulance here in a minute. So it's the way we treat it. And then also with the parity law that was passed federally a few years ago, employers are not required to have mental health coverage for their employees. Believe that. If you do offer it, it has to be similar or the same benefits as for physical ailments, but it does not have to be offered. So we still stigmatize people with mental health and mental illnesses. I want to give an example of people in recovery, and there's many. We've had many entertainers, business people. There's people you work with that are in recovery, but one that I just want to use as a quick example. If we have NFL football this fall, every Sunday, there's a person that we all see. He's a Hall of Fame quarterback. I believe he's got 5 Super Bowl rings, and he played for the Pittsburgh Steelers. His name happens to be Terry Bradshaw. Terry Bradshaw lives with bipolar disorder, and yet when we see him on TV, he looks fine. So obviously he's getting the support he needs and the treatment he needs, and he's functioning very well. So we just need to get rid of the stigma. Next slide. So one of the big things with mental illnesses, we only see the tip of the iceberg. We don't really know what's going on inside. So I can say my son, if he was here today and you asked him, how you doing, Mike? He would say, I'm doing fine. It's a mask. Because of the shame, a person will hide that they're not doing fine. So some things I learned with him, when you go to the doctor, you fill out a form. What's your pain level today? 1 through 10. Or they have the smiley face or sad face. I learned after a while, that's what I did with my son. Mike, what's your pain level today? Dad, it's a 10. Let's talk about it. What's going on? And of course, it would sometimes be like pulling teeth to get him to talk about it. But at least we started at a point where he was telling me what was going on. So I just throw that out. If you're concerned about somebody, just start it that way, you know? That when I go to the doc, they ask me what's my pain level. You might just say, what's your pain level today? And get an answer that at least gives you a barometer where they're at and what they're thinking. Next slide. So suicide is a major epidemic in our society. In 2018, over 48,000 suicide deaths. It's the 10th leading cause of death. And then looking at our workforce, and I know we're still a largely male industry, Among males 25 to 54, it's the second leading cause of death. 78% of all suicides are males. You may think, wow, well, they only make up half the population. Well, we'll talk about that in our industry too. Males don't like to talk about what's going on inside. Plus, about 70% of all suicides are because of the use of firearms. Males tend to use firearms. Suicide deaths have increased 33% since 1999. And in 2018, there were an estimated 1.4 million suicide attempts. So we have to think not only of the suicides, but suicide attempts. My son had 2 before his death. So when you hear about a member or hear about somebody that friend, neighbor, whatever, had a suicide attempt, you won't know about it. We didn't tell anybody other than my immediate family after his first attempt. We didn't tell too many people after his second attempt because of the shame. I was ashamed. How in the world can my son try to end his life? What's going on? So again, there's that mask that just covers this. It's amazing that people don't talk about it because we're afraid to talk about it. Then last, I want to say, I don't think we're going to make any headway on suicide because we haven't. When I first started doing this about 5 years ago, there were 39,000 suicide deaths, I should say. So I'm going to submit we need to quit another new term, quit using the word commit suicide. My son did not want to die. He wanted his pain to end. When we say commit suicide, it's my opinion, we blame the person for their death. Well, they wanted to die. No, they didn't. So I would submit, use the term that I've been using. My son died by suicide, or you might say died from suicide. That takes the blame off the person, and it lifts the shame. This is horrible. A suicide death in our family, it took me a long time to even use the words that my son died by suicide. You can't believe the shame that goes with this. So opioid deaths, we're at an epidemic, but actually last year we had a slight dip from the previous year. And I would submit that happened because we don't blame people for an opioid death. We blame the insurance companies. We blame the pharmaceuticals. We blame the doctors. And because of that, we actually took some action as a nation to help people that were living with opioid addiction. And we need to do the same thing with suicides. Next slide. So here's the heart of the issue. Why us? The construction industry has more suicides than any other industry. Our suicide rate's nearly 4 times the general population. We should be just mad as heck about that. But why is this? So some things I've thought about. And I lived in this industry for 45 years, and I grew up in a construction family. We're an industry, every day is game day. Every day counts. There's lots of pressure to perform. Who wants to be taken off the starting lineup, the starting team? We're a service industry. We got a lot of pressure to get the job done every day. And all we think about in our industry is get her done, get the job done. So nobody ever wants to not show up for the game. What do we do in the athletics? The player that gets, it's a little different because they have contracts, but the player that gets hurt for the season, they're off the team. They're out of the ballpark. We don't do that in our industry. We do it differently. You can't show up to work, you're laid off. You're not on the team anymore. And the only way a player makes money in this industry, you got to work hours. It's all about hours. So it's this tough guy culture. I never want to say anything's wrong. I never want to say I'm hurting. I'm just going to tough it out. There's a lot of family separation. We go where the work is. And I did a lot of traveling in my career. It's lonely. It's stressful. And you're away from your support system. We do a lot of, because of our customers, 1 week you're working days, another week you're working nights. There's a lot of sleep disruption. And 1 week you may not work. The next week you're working 7/10s. Again, we do this stuff because That's where the work is. There's a lot of chronic pain. We're a physical industry. You do this for 20, 30 years, the shoulders, the back, the knees. So starters, you take some over-the-counter drugs. After a while, you go to the doc and you maybe take some prescription drugs. In the meantime, to make it through the day, make it through the week, you're self-medicating. And in our industry, the use of self-medication is tolerated. It's not frowned upon. And then we have a lot of financial uncertainty because when the job's over, you may not have any work. Even though you worked hard, showed up every day, the job's over, there's no work. In my climate, in the winter, we don't work outside. There's seasonal layoffs. And lastly, we're an industry where we're outdoors people, a lot of hunters, and easy access to lethal means, primarily firearms. So all those things and really are disruptive, stressful, and when you take it all inside and don't have a place to go and let it out, just with normal mental health is a problem. People that live with a mental illness, back to their brains, they need balance. They need really a routine of diet, sleep, exercise. It's really critical to stay on course. Next slide. So there's a lot of myths about suicide. And you've probably heard some of these, and maybe even, I would hope I could get you to think that these they aren't real. Those that talk about suicide won't do it. If they're talking about it, they're thinking about it. Believe me. If they're talking about it, they're thinking about it. Talking to someone about suicide might put the idea in their head. If you inside are really concerned about somebody and you're saying, boy, I wonder if they're thinking of ending their life. If you're thinking about it, they're already past you. They're already putting a plan together. So if you're thinking about it, you got to sit down with that person, and we'll go through that in a little bit of how to ask what's going on. Suicidal attempts are just a cry for attention. Totally not true. They're a cry for help. Because of the shame, a person just doesn't even know how to say it. I'm having suicidal thoughts. They're not going to just come out and say that, but they're going to leave clues, so we're going to get into that. And then once a person has a suicidal plan, they cannot be stopped. Totally false. There's steps to all actions in life. Every action we take, we have an idea, we develop a plan, and then we take action. So all of you maybe had an idea to attend a webinar. Then this was offered. So you made a plan. I got to set myself some time. I got to figure out how to get on, and you took action. Everything we do in life has those 3 steps. So I want to really stress all suicides are preventable. All mental illnesses are treatable. All suicides are preventable. Next slide. So there's 3 types of general clues, and you'll maybe see some of these or none of these, but it gives you an idea. There's verbal clues, there's behavioral clues, and then there's situational clues. So all these are serious. Verbal clue, I wish I were dead. I'm tired of life. I'm a burden to everyone. Soon you won't have to worry about me. Those are pretty clear clues that somebody's losing hope. And they're not said to get attention. They're said because I'm hurting. You might just well say it's like, I'm bleeding, help me. Next slide. Behavioral clues. Withdrawing from family. Family and friends. So the person that always was part of the crew seemed withdrawn. Hey, what's going on, man? Moody, hopelessness, unexplained anger. Back to that anger. It's huge. Putting personal affairs in order. Giving away prized possessions. Acquiring a gun or stockpiling pills. Again, losing hope. I can't go on any longer. The pain is too extreme. Next slide. Situational clues. Loss of a job, loss of major relationship, diagnosis of a terminal illness, loss of a family member or friend by suicide, arrest and loss of freedom. So not only have you lost hope, you're losing control. My life's out of control. So to show how huge this is, in 2015, the Centers for Disease Control studied all suicide deaths. And 29% of those deaths occurred within 2 weeks of a life-changing event. So we got to look differently when we're hearing about somebody's getting divorced, somebody's son died by suicide, person that lost their job, and today there's millions have lost their job. What's going on? These are life-changing events wrapped with lots of shame. And if your mental health isn't well, back to that dirty windshield, what is that person, how are they reacting to this? Maybe at this point, quickly, are there any questions? I've got a little bit more to cover yet. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. So you've been seeing a fellow employee, you've been seeing a member, you've been seeing an apprentice. You're wondering what's going on with them. You're concerned. This needs to be a one-on-one meeting. Because of the shame of all mental illnesses, of all suicidal thoughts, an audience is not going to be what you want. So meet with the person alone, convey your concern. Tell the person what you've been seeing. I've been concerned about your outbursts of anger. I've been concerned about some of what you've been saying. I've been concerned about you're not showing up to work, and you've been one of the most loyal, dedicated members we have. Here's the next really key. Listen without judgment. Their dirty windshield, they're going to be saying things that you don't even understand. Saying, I wish I was dead. I'm just a burden to everybody. No judgment. Don't make statements like, I don't know how you can even say that. That doesn't make sense. Remember back to Luke saying about logic? That part of their brain isn't working. Logic is not going to be the thing to work. Just listen. Be with them. Show compassion. Stay with them. Don't leave them alone. Then you're doing this whole process, you need to be assessing. Is this like a first aid where the person just cut their finger and we can get the employee assistance program involved and let's make a call right now? Or is this like losing a hand in an industrial accident where you need to call more than first aid? This is a 911 call. So during this whole process, you're assessing. Then you want to make sure if there's any lethal means, if the person is really in a crisis situation, remove any lethal means that are readily available. The next step, you want to assure them, let's get some help. I'm here with you. Are you willing to get some help? And then you're going to have resources available. So it's a step-by-step process. And many times, all this means is, again, it's a first aid issue. But then as Chris mentioned in one of his statements, support is huge. So back to all mental health issues, it's that ongoing support. So it isn't like one and done. We tend to do that. And it's easier to do with physical injuries because with a physical injury, you're back and you look like you're okay. But again, we don't have a way to see that in a person living with a mental illness. It needs continued care. Next slide. You can make a difference. Quick example. I did a presentation at the company that I retired from about 6 months after I retired. All the employees, and it was longer than this one. But about 3 months after that, a real key long-term employee left a text with his supervisor early in the morning. The text said, "I can't do this anymore." That supervisor was smart enough to say, you know, this doesn't make sense. There's something wrong here. He got his supervisor involved. They made contact with the employee, found out where he was, said, "Hey, we're here to help you. Can we come and see you?" That employee was in his car, all alone in a park with the means to end his life. They took action. They didn't say, well, I don't know what's wrong with that guy. I'll deal with it tomorrow. They took immediate action, saved a life, got him the help he needed, and he's still a valuable employee. So you got to treat these clues seriously. You can make a difference. We all can. Next slide. So I'm so proud of what the IUPAT is doing right now. It's all about changing our culture. It's all about making wellness a priority. It's all about being open. It's okay to ask for support. And not only making it okay, but to support it. It's okay to train, and we should be training soft skills. As an industry, we're great about technical skills. We're not a good industry of just, it's okay to talk about these things. Knowing what the resources are. The website for Helping Hand is fantastic. And then treating physical and mental illness is the same. So I'll give you a quick example. So with a physical ailment, let's say a person's out for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever. We bring that person back, and I think all companies have light duty. And everybody treats the person, hey, we're going to bring you back slowly. We're going to get you back to work, get you back. And everybody knows they're not totally in their A game. But when somebody goes to a facility like Luke's for 28 days, what do we do the first day they come back? Hey, nice to have you back. And now we're right back on the field. Game time. Whoa, why do we treat that different? This person just was away dealing with one of the hardest things they've had to deal with in life. They're still healing. And we throw them right back in the pond. And we got to quit doing things like that. If I had more time, I'd give you my old Bob, new Bob story. I learned a lot of things, how to treat people differently in the business. Our business, from an employer standpoint, but I would submit the entire industry, we're so production oriented. We forget that sometimes that we're talking about real people and they have needs. And the last thing I'll say is we tackled safety in my career. In the 60s, we tolerated fatalities on job sites. By the 80s, we said, we're not doing that anymore. Then we tolerated injuries. By the 90s, we said 0 injuries. And now today, we're saying 0 near misses. So we can do the same thing. Our industry should be ashamed to say we have more suicides than any other industry. Now is the time to change the culture. The last slide is some resources. One I neglected to put on there, and I'm sorry. If you go to the next, the suicide helpline, I neglected to put it on there. The suicide helpline, it's 24/7 with trained professionals. It's 1-800-273-8255. 1-800-273-8255 or text 741-741. So thank you for the time. I know I covered a lot of ground, and I hope we see some of you in Hanover in one of our next classes. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask? There was a couple of good things in the chat section that I thought maybe, David, if you want to ask your question out loud, or I can read it off if you'd like.
No, I can ask. You know, I was listening to Bob speak, and I guess one of the many things that crossed my mind is if someone is suicidal, I wonder if they tend to confide in a person or a couple of people from time to time, if something like that alleviates any of their suicidal thoughts? If so, is I mean a short period of time? I mean, I guess, does this person maybe confide in someone once or twice, 3 or 4 times, whatever, and gets over this hurdle, or eventually carries out that thought? Is professional help really, I guess, the only way? I mean, can someone confide in someone about this once a month, a couple times a year, and get over it? Not live with it, but get past it for healthier thinking. I guess that, if this makes any sense.
Well, again, I'm not a trained mental health person, but what I've learned is people can have suicidal thoughts regularly. And one thing I didn't get to, a class I teach is called QPR. If you have concerns about someone having suicidal thoughts, again, with compassion, once you've set the platform in a one-on-one conversation, you need to ask the question, are you having suicidal thoughts? Are you thinking of ending your life? Usually that frees the person up to talk about. And then not to be that you have all the answers. That's the time to get some professional help. Call that suicide prevention helpline. Call your crisis center. Because what we've seen with people that have attempted suicide and lived, that whole process from idea to plan to action, in 50% of the people that have lived through an attempt, that all only took an hour's time. It isn't something they typically think about for days and days and days. It kind of, that trigger hits, again, they're not thinking clearly, and it's like, I just lost my job, screw it, it's all over, I'm, that type of bing, bang, boom. It happens quickly. So kind of an answer to your question, ask the question, but don't try to do this all on your own. It's clearly a matter, and I wish I would have been able to understand to ask those questions to my son.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions or anything anybody wants to add before we say thank you to Bob and move to our next presenter? Okay. Okay, up next, thank you, Bob. That was great.
Thank you.
And please feel free to send questions if you still have them. You can send them to, put them in the chat box while we're in session here. Okay, so up next we have Mike Hines, who is going to talk a little bit more about the IUPAT Helping Hand.
Thank you, Alice, and thank you, Bob and Luke, both of you for your presentations. It's leading us to building a program together, binding together to build this program that'll stand the test of time for the IUPAT. Much like Bob was just discussing how safety evolves. I can see this evolving in years to come, much like safety. And it will stand the test of time. And all this is brought about by the heavy toll on the construction industry in North America and the recognition of what's been happening in both Canada and the United States, that there's a serious problem with substance use disorder, mental health issues, and suicide. And just to recap a few things from Bob and Luke both, recent studies in the U.S. Center for Disease Control and the Canadian Association for Suicide Prevention reported that construction industry in both the United States and Canada suffer the highest suicide rate compared to all other industries. We can change to the next slide too. So there's been staggering suicide statistics and opioid use statistics for both countries. In 2018, as Bob had mentioned, 48,344 Americans died by suicide. That's an average of 132 suicides a day. In Canada, there are over 4,000 deaths by suicide each year, with an average of 10 people per day. And suicide is 3 times higher among men compared to women. A third of the deaths, as we heard, by suicide are among people 45 to 59. And suicide is the second leading cause of death among youth and young adults 15 to 34 years old. For every suicide, there's 25 attempts. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, the 9th leading cause in Canada. Suicide rate is highest in middle age, with white men in particular. So if a construction worker can't be on the job because of pain and injury, they don't get paid. This basic fact has greatly contributed to the rise in use of opioids and other prescription drugs to treat pain so that men and women in the trades can get another day on the job despite their injuries. Unfortunately, this has led to some tragic numbers in the construction industry when it comes to suicide and substance use disorder. Next slide. Recent studies have found that opioids accounted for 20% of total spending on prescription drugs in the construction industry. That is 5 to 10% greater than that of other industries. An estimated 11.6% of full-time construction workers, that's 1.1 million people, have used illicit drugs within the past month. An average of 115 Americans die every day from opioid overdose, and more than 10,300 Canadians lost their lives to opioids in less than 3 years, from January 2016 to September 2018. Slide 4. So I just want to let that sink in for a moment. Back before FIF this last year, I went to GST Gallus and I asked him if we had any statistics on suicide of our members. And he came back to me and he provided me this information that 11 IUPAT members died by suicide in 2018. And that just floored me. It still does when I see that up there. It's just emotional to know that a brother or a sister has passed away due to death by suicide. And I would think, and I don't hope, but I would think that that would affect all of us in the same way. When a coworker, a friend, or a family member or acquaintance dies by suicide, it creates a ripple effect that jolts us at our foundation. We heard from Bob today the impact that a loss of love of a loved one has on our lives. And I'd like to thank Bob for his testimony to that, and also thank Luke again for their testimonies and their words to us. Slide 5. Again, if anybody has anything that they'd like to talk about at any point in time, please do so. Just unmute yourself. So through this, the IUPA took action through that recognition of the opioid crisis and suicide. At the Finishing Industries Forum, FIF, in 2017, we acknowledged this crisis and we brought over 130 people together at the FIF sessions for substance use disorder and suicide prevention. It was a labor management coalition made up of employers and labor, and some of you were in that forum. There was open, frank dialogue from both labor and management about substance use and suicide issues faced in our councils and businesses throughout North America. We heard from experts in the field, and then we broke into work groups. 3 actions were prioritized: survey, media, and curriculum. A labor management task force work group was convened, and an action plan was developed by the task force and presented to the General Executive Board. Upon approval by the GEB, the action items moved forward to the task force for further development and rollout. So clearly we had to take action for awareness. The committee took action on 3 primary goals: launched the IUPAT Helping Hand website that all members, families, and friends of the IUPAT could access to find help and resources for treatment. Then create a curriculum to erase the stigma of seeking help. Then we would launch the curriculum through a Train the Trainer course, which you are in here today, and provide that access online also. We accomplished all 3 of those goals. Next slide. So the first thing that we really needed to do is we needed to know where our council stood on the services that were offered to our members and to our employers throughout North America. So the LMCI conducted a survey of nearly 3,000 contractors and IUPAT members on their awareness of union and employer programs to help with substance use disorder and mental health issues. Unfortunately, a third of the contractors surveyed and over half the members who responded did not know that help for these challenges was available through the employee assistance programs affiliated with their district councils. The surveys confirm that we have work to do in providing services to our members and employers. On the PowerPoint, you see that there's a lack of awareness to the employee assistance program throughout IUPAT councils. Only 44% of members are aware of programs available for mental health, suicide, and substance use disorder. More important, though, is 61% of the members would utilize those services available through the EAP. And that's why awareness is so important to us right now. And that's the utilization of the Helping Hand website and changing the culture of construction here online and in your district councils through your training centers. So obviously media and the awareness to provide these resources was our next agenda item. And in 2018, IUPATHelpingHand.com was launched. Online resources provide background on why suicide and substance use disorder are hitting the construction industry so hard. It lists warning signs to look out for in a coworker or a loved one who may be suffering through a mental health situation. You'll find national call center numbers in the US and Canada for suicide prevention and the means to find treatment for substance use disorder. There are resource materials and toolbox talks to download and distribute and post in locations such as union halls, your training center, your council offices, employer warehouses, and any location where a member would see this information. Not only is it important that the awareness resources reach the member through the IUPA training and council locations, but we're also asking our employers to come alongside to support the IUPAT Helping Hand initiative. Employers can be the first to recognize that a member may be struggling with a problem of some kind. The signs are not hidden. There's absenteeism, decrease in productivity, social distancing. Of course, that might not be so much one in the times we're in right now, but it is on a job site where somebody is distancing themselves from the rest of the crew. And there's physical signs of substance use or just some of the indications that a member is struggling and in need of support. The employer can become an extremely important component in recognizing this and supporting the member with substance use and mental health issues. Members spend a majority of their time under the eyes of the employer's leadership staff. In many cases, this is where the first indication of a problem can be exposed. When the member can receive intervention and the services necessary to receive help needed, then they can be on the road to recovery. We can also assist with peer advocacy to come alongside what could become a critical situation. And what is a peer advocate? That's a trusted individual with compassion, empathy, a servant's heart, and a willing passion to give their time for their fellow members. As the district councils develop their helping hand task force teams, we recommend that this will be a point of discussion. But first, the task force will need to take steps to build the council's foundation through labor management collaboration. I will talk about that a little bit more in the next steps. I also want to talk about curriculum and this Changing the Culture of Construction course. It was adapted from other proven programs and implemented at the International Training Center in 2018. The training is designed to inform and empower all IUPAT members by separating fact from fiction and encouraging our workforce to make healthy decisions when it comes to substance use and seeking mental health support. The goal is to educate individuals and in turn promoting a healthy, safe, substance-free work environment. In 2019, the curriculum became an online course for district councils in the United States and Canada to learn and teach in all IUPAT training centers in North America. Next slide, please. Next slide. I got a little ahead of myself. The Changing the Culture of Construction training is the foundation of the IUPA Helping Hand Initiative. Training and awareness will save lives of the IUPAT members for generations to come. And that's something that we can count on. I've had several BMSTs contact me and talk about some of these issues that they've had in their councils with suicide and attempted suicide. So we want to continue to work towards developing the Changing the Culture of Construction in our council centers. As I'd mentioned, it's the foundation of the Helping Hand Initiative. Slide 9. So some of the next steps in plotting out for the future of the Helping Hand Initiative are implementation of changing the culture into the councils with the goal of giving our members and district council representatives the skill sets to recognize when a coworker or anyone in their life may be struggling with substance use disorder or a mental health issue. Utilization of the online LMS, Changing the Culture of Construction training. It's just so important that that tool is utilized, especially in times that we're in right now. It's a great tool to be able to inform our members that it's available, go on, take the course, and then obviously there'd be some follow-up that goes along with that. Development of Helping Hand Task Force team in our district councils to manage and build that district council program. The team will be led by the BMST and supported by an employer co-chair. Awareness. I ask at every Changing the Culture of Construction training, how many are aware of the IUPAT Helping Hand initiative and have been on the webpage? Sadly, only a few in attendance raised their hand. So we must continue to discuss substance use disorder, suicide issues, support members and employers throughout all the councils of the IUPAT. Currently, there's a labor management task force that's made up of members from each council, or not each council, each district of the IUPAT. And it's been convened to meet on a monthly basis to continue to build on the foundation that's been started with Helping Hand. We're here to listen to your needs, and we're here to continue to build based on the foundation that's already been developed. The group will provide leadership and support to all the councils and the training center as we move to build Helping Hand throughout North America in all of our councils. And this can't happen without your support. So your participation in our webinar today is the first step in moving the Helping Hand initiative forward for the members in your councils. Our hope is that through the changing the culture of construction training and the IUPAT Helping Hand resources, that you'd be inspired to move this valuable life-saving educational support to all our members of all your councils, adding mental health as an important component to the services the IUPAT councils provide to members, employers, and their families. Thank you for coming today. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me any questions about Helping Hand. And that's that.
Thanks, Mike, Bob, and Luke for all of that information, and thanks for all here who joined the continuation, the second part of the class. Before we conclude here, I just wanted to open it up again to anybody that wanted to share any of their, whether it be their experiences at their training centers or from the field, before we wrap up. So I'll give everybody an opportunity, anybody an opportunity if they want to have any remarks on the delivery here or what you learned here today.
Hello? Hello?
We hear you.
Yep, go ahead, we can hear you.
Yeah, this is Jim McCann from Boston. I'm the Jim that Chris brought up earlier. And I just wanted to tell Mike that I just saw at the beginning, that at the end of that slide, that about the mental health first aid thing. I took that training, the mental health first aid instructor training, geez, it was like a month ago now. It was supposed to be a 5-day thing. They moved it up to 3 days because of this Corona thing, and they kicked me out of Florida. But it was, yeah, it was very informative. It's going to be important when this thing is over for people to be ready. Hopefully people reach out. I know that Jeff Sullivan, business manager up here, has put it in his emails to reach out to Chris, and I put it out in emails for my local to reach out to me. We're just trying to be available. And thanks for the invite to this. I apologize for not having a video though. That's it.
Thank you for the comments. Anybody else have anything to share?
Yeah, I don't know if you guys can hear me. This is Matt Shepard. I'm out of DC 14 in Chicago.
Hear you.
It's the timing of this couldn't come at a better time. Our industry, our members are going to be going through a rough time here, and I think you're going to see a big need for stuff like this, and we need to be proactive instead of reactive.
You're absolutely right, Matt. And I'm so thankful that the IUPAT back in 2017, at the time of FIF, was forward thinking and had recognized the issues that we face with substance use disorder and suicide. And as you mentioned, here we are today. I mean, it's extremely difficult for our members and our employers out there right now. Let's hope that we can rebound for this. But in the meantime, we continue to grow Helping Hand, present changing the culture of construction. We'll provide that support, and hopefully through that, some comfort to our members. There are some other things that will be unveiled here in the very near future. I think they're exciting. And we look forward just to continuing to build on the foundation that we started in 2017. And as I had mentioned before, looking forward 10, 20, 30, 40 years, this is going to be the standard that mental health, first aid, and substance use disorder and suicide training will be a regular part of our curriculums in all our training centers. So thanks, Matt.
Thanks again to all those that attended and to those who presented. Just as you can see in the chat box, under FTI 1141, under the core 158, there's a lot of learning resources, additional resources, including the presentation that you saw here today, and the other PowerPoints, if you were gonna, when we get back to training face-to-face, that you can deliver to your apprentices. Also, just as a side note, as we continue, the FTI is closed obviously through April. We've postponed all classes in May. However, we are going to continue to have learning opportunities for instructors. We have a workshop next that starts tomorrow, and there's 2 other ones that deal with using Zoom, these types of technologies to deliver instruction to your apprentices. That will be offered this week and next week. Wednesday, there's a sexual harassment class where our fund attorneys, Warren and Marty, will deliver the updated rules and regulations as far as that is concerned. Nicole, I think, has already sent out. We're gonna work with Cascade to deliver first aid training as well. I just also have a call back to NCCO. A lot of these places that do the face-to-face training are looking for opportunities as well to deliver their training, maybe something similar to this. So stay tuned for other announcements from that perspective. If anybody doesn't have anything else, we'll conclude this. I know this will also be recorded. This has been recorded, and it will be posted in the LMS, I'm sure. So look for an announcement as far as that is concerned. And if you have other learning opportunities that you think would be of value during this time period for our instructors, please send an email to the FTI International, and we'll do our best to accommodate that as well, that you think that your instructors, you or your instructors might need during this time while we continue to work remotely. So thanks again for everybody, and stay safe out there.
Thanks.